Hello and welcome back to They Don't Teach This in Law School. I'm your host, Charlie Mann of Law Firm Alchemy. And for the first time ever, I'm going to have a guest who I was inspired to talk with because of a little back and forth we had on LinkedIn that I know we're going to get into. And I'm really excited for both of our perspectives on this because I think it's important to have the discussions out in the open. He is the founder of Miller Law and New Modern Lawyer, a coaching organization for law firm owners, and someone who clearly has some thoughts on the profession, growing a law firm, and I think we're gonna get into it in a really positive way. So, Bradley Miller, welcome to the show.
Thanks, appreciate it, Charlie.
Absolutely. So, Brad, let's jump right into it with the question: What's the one thing they don't teach you in law school?
Well, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of things that they don't teach you. Otherwise, I mean, there wouldn't be this podcast if they did teach everything, right? Like, I mean, you have to name it something different if that was the case. But one thing that they don't teach you in law school, and I know they definitely didn't when I was there, and I'm assuming they probably still don't do it, is authenticity.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, traditionally, it's probably starting back in the 70s or so. Kind of the main purpose, the main goal of law schools was to pump out associates. So they give you a minimum, competency in things. We teach you how to know some black letter law in these different areas, and we say, okay, here is a base level, first level associate coming out here, and then it's up to you as a law firm then to mold them, to teach them what they need to know to practice. That's on you, but we'll give you this basically lump of clay. You need to go and make it into something.
Yeah.
But all lump of clay look the same. And unfortunately, I don't think a lot of law school has changed to now, instead of giving lumps of clay, we're not giving, bowls or vases or anything like that. We're still giving that lump of clay. The problem is that now the law firms they're taking it to mold it. They expect you to be a bowl, or you don't get into a law firm. And so now you got to figure out how to be a vase when all you are from law school is this lump of clay. So that's the start of it.
Yeah. So and I love that idea. So let's dig into that idea of being a bowl, a vase, a mug, whatever it might be. When you're framing that up, what are you thinking about in terms of what a bowl would look like? Like, what would it look like if someone came out with that shape to them?
So part of it is knowing how to practice law, how to be a lawyer. I mean, that's something that they kind of give you this idea of, this is what a lawyer looks like and what you should do or what should be, the nice suit and tie or whatever. But that's, I mean, people don't hire lawyers because of the suit you wear. They don't hire you because, they don't hire a lawyer because of, I went to so-and-so law school. They hire you because you are someone that they feel that they can trust, someone that they think, hey, you know what, this person, this guy, this girl, whomever, they get me. And I think that they're going to be able to solve my problem, my legal problem, whatever it is. Right. And so you need to have some of the characteristics of that, but you also need to be able to stand out from all the other bowls and all the mugs out there, because there are how many other thousands of lawyers out there that are doing very similar things to you. And you need to be able to say, hey, look, I'm a really cool mug. You want to hire me. You want me, Mug Brad.
Okay. So what does that look like? If we've managed to figure out, I fit within this category, and maybe when you're talking about, say, mug, bowl, vase, etc., is this like, I'm a trial lawyer versus, say, a contract lawyer? What are you thinking about when you're setting up those molds?
I mean, that could be the shape, but honestly, It really is just, how am I different? How do I differentiate myself from everybody else? And how do I allow who I really am inside, my personality, to come across? Because again, that's not something that we promote in law school. That's not something that we really promote across the board in the profession. So how do I stand out? How do I be myself, who I really am deep down, and be a lawyer?
So how do you do that in your firm?
Part of it is try not to care about whether people think. It's trying not to be concerned about kind of this mold. I mean, when I started out practicing, I had this idea of what a lawyer was supposed to look like. And so I tried to fit that. I tried to look like that. I tried to sound like that. I talked that way, the words that I used. I wanted to be, people to think, hey, that's Brad. He fits the mold of a lawyer. And as I practice more, I've started to realize that doesn't matter.
Right.
And it's better off, rather than trying to fit a certain mold, it's better off to just be Brad, because clients like Brad for who Brad is, not the Brad that looks like every other lawyer down the street.
Okay, so I think this would be really, I'm going to ask you like this big, broad, hopefully interesting question that could help others who are struggling with this issue, which is, who is the Brad that your clients now experience?
It's very similar to the same Brad that my wife gets to see, that my daughter gets to see, that my friends get to see. It's not that I have work Brad, lawyer Brad, personal life Brad. It's Brad is overall one person, and not making a distinguish between that and try to play up to some sort of ideal.
And how does the Brad, the unit of person that you are, how does that differ from, say, maybe what the standard lawyer would look like?
Well, I mean, I talked about a couple things. I don't use big legal fancy terms, right? I try to break things down so people can understand them using the words that they use. I try to focus on understanding the client, on connecting with the client. I try not to put myself on a pedestal above the client. I know a lot of times lawyers have a habit of kind of coming across as this better type of a person. And I don't necessarily think that's maybe intentional, but that's just kind of what we're ingrained as. Hey, you're a lawyer, you're professional. That means that you're a higher standard or something like that. And so it's realizing that I'm no different than the person down the street.
I have a specific set of skills, the Liam Neeson quote.
Exactly. And I went to law school and they gave me a piece of paper that says, hey, guess what? You can now practice law.
That's right. That is helpful to have that and be able to practice law. And,
it's kind of important. Yeah.
Yeah. But look, I was having this discussion recently, Brad, with another law firm owner about the reputational status of lawyers, firm owners, lawyers grouped together. And it was about the difference between, say, the corporate style of attorney and we'll call it a hometown attorney. And that so much of the reputation of the hometown attorney is really people frowning upon, maybe we'll call it corporate attorney, but we won't get into the politics of it, but also people perceive, lawyers who are in Congress, and there's kind of that negativity that drains down towards the awesome hometown lawyers like you who are doing this incredible work for the community, for the clients that you serve. That authenticity seems to be a big component of creating that level of connection. So if we're talking about from law school on, what role could the law school play in improving that reputation? And then as attorneys move up in the profession itself, how can they bring that authenticity and improved reputation into the profession writ large?
So I think it starts with admissions. I think it starts by focusing on diversity and inclusion. Because if you are only bringing in law students that all look the same, that are all, the standard kind of white male or white female type of a person, you're going to end up with very similar lawyers popping out at the other end. Right. So you want to first start the admissions process and, hey, how can we identify people who don't look like everybody else, but actually represent the community that they're in, And then from there, I think we need to try to get rid of this concept, the idea that there is something a lawyer looks like, or a way the lawyer talks or a lawyer acts, this kind of professional thing. Like, that was always a word for me, was like, I want to make sure I'm going to come across as professional. People think I'm professional.
Yeah.
If you work in a profession, you're professional. End of story, right?
Yep.
So trying to let people know that, hey, you don't have to look like this. You don't have to act like this to still be a lawyer, and really encouraging that, creating creativity. And again, people just being themselves and letting themselves be shown. And then again, encouraging that, pumping those people out, and kind of keeping going with that, start encouraging people who don't fit the mold, encouraging people who are trying new things, who are innovating, who are trying to improve things and not just doing things the way they have always been done. How are we moving the profession forward? That's what we need to be focusing on, not just who fits this ideal the best that we have.
So if we could fast forward, let's say 3 years, and within those 3 years, we could experience some type of dramatic transformation in the profession, what would you love to see change?
Oh, gracious. A lot of things. But one thing I would definitely like to see is more of a client-centric focus. It's kind of ironic that a lot of times lawyers are very client first. So they want to put the client first, like, hey, the client called me to drop everything and respond to them. I need to make sure the client can always get a hold of me whenever, or, whatever the client needs, that's what we got to do.
Yeah.
And while that might be great for a client, that specific client, it's not great for the lawyers, because you are now working long hours. You're working late because you're dropping everything for this person. You're putting them ahead of yourself. So you're not getting the rest that you need. You're not taking care of yourself, your staff, because you're so focused on what that one client wants. So instead, I think it would be more of a focus of being client-centric, which is looking at the overall, what's best for overall for all my clients. So me being at my best health is best for all my clients.
Yeah.
Me not being available is beneficial for all my clients, because that means I'm going to be on top of my game when I need to be there, as opposed to like, well, one client needs me here and one needs me here. That's great at the time, but the other clients are ultimately suffering during that time.
Yeah.
So, that's something I would like to see better. A lot of different components, so we can go down rabbit holes and talk about all kinds of stuff with that, but that's just kind of top of mind.
It seems to come down, at least in my experience, a lot of that comes down to the appropriate setting of boundaries. That is often the inability to do that appears to be driven a lot by fear of how, say, clients will respond, how other lawyers will respond. So it sounds to me like you have gone through the process of setting boundaries. What did that process look like for yourself?
It came to the point where I had concerns that my wife was going to leave me. That kind of was the kick in the seat that really changed something inside me. That, along with becoming a father, those two kind of things together. When I realized that the way I was doing things was going to end up causing me to lose a lot more than if I stayed the same. And so that was the moment that I realized I had to change things and start setting some more boundaries.
And take me through that. You come to this realization, which, thank you for sharing that honesty about, what you were going through there. So you have this suddenly realization, something has to change. How did you start making change, and what did those initial changes look like?
It's kind of hard to kind of explain, because it's a change at the identity level. So I went from someone who would think of the practice first, like, what do I need to do to what my clients need. I would stay at my desk late in the evenings working on websites and things like that. Like, what do I need to do to make money? Like, how can I support my family by making money? When what was really important, more important to my wife, was how can I be present for her and my kid? And so it was kind of, it was an identity shift. It was realizing what's most important to me. And it was that. And realizing that maybe the best way to support them isn't just by having money, but maybe there's more things. Maybe it's making sure that there's dinner on the table when she gets home. It's being present when we're sitting there, not going upstairs and hiding in my office, working on something, but sitting there and actually having conversations, being supportive, not treating her like a glorified roommate. I mean, that was we had lots of fights over that, as, actually like a partner and not just a roommate. And so it was like, it wasn't, it was a kind of a moment where all kind of came together, but it was definitely an accumulation of a lot of different things that played together at once.
I love that you use the word identity, Brad, because when I have the opportunity to talk a little bit more at length about the coaching that we do, I focus on, this is really about identity. The teaching of the entrepreneurial skill set is it's a vehicle to embrace your entrepreneurial identity. It's the communication tools are, how can you embrace your role as a person of influence, or as someone who is a better communicator with a spouse? Like, who do you really want to be? Because, look, I'm looking at it as an outsider, but I've worked with so many lawyers at this point, and I love working with lawyers for this reason, that law school has given you this incredible set of skills and opportunity to apply in changing other people's lives and helping clients. But it creates such an identity that the big question is, what happens when that identity starts to get stripped away as you're exposed to, say, you're now a father? How does that, what friction does that create with the lawyer identity? You're a firm owner, the friction that creates with being a lawyer. I'd be interested, like, for the lawyers out there who are handling any one of these elements of identity friction, are there any resources, ideas people should wrestle with, paths that you would send them down to maybe accelerate the process?
I think the first thing that I would say is you need to look at your priorities. You need to look at your values. What's most important in your life? And I realized during this time that my family needed to be more important. That was something that when I wasn't acting like it was, but it really was. But, when I sat down and think about it, what's important? If the house was burning, what the first thing I would do? I'd grab my kid. Like that's, that would be the very first thing to do. I wouldn't grab my laptop or anything work related. I would grab my daughter. And so if that was what's really important to me, and if I lost that, how that would had such a deep impact, how do I need to act then to go along with that fact? Because what I was doing before wasn't. When I wasn't being present, when I was merely kind of acting as a financial conduit, that wasn't me being a good father or prioritizing the value of being a father and having a family. And so I needed to shift. And I would say you need to think about what's most important to you and be honest. Because a lot of times we think something's important and we realize, well, maybe that's not as important as I think it was, or I'm not acting in alignment with that. I say my family's important, but I'm definitely not acting it. A third party would say, your family's not important. You're never home. You're missing events. Like, you're never home for dinner. How important is your family really in that case? And so it's just sitting down with yourself, taking some time and working through this stuff. There's no fast and easy way to do it. It just takes some work.
Yeah, that doesn't happen overnight. It's because, I mean, how many spouses have done and I'll speak for the husbands, the idea that I'm going to come home with flowers one time, and clearly that makes me a romantic person, right? And you do that, and then you wait until next Valentine's Day to do something nice. It's not that one decision. It's decisions made every single day. And that is, I mean, let's be easy, Brad. That is not easy in any aspect of our lives to make those positive identity decisions day in, day out. So kudos to you for making the transformation. It's not easy. And let me ask you this, is this something that you continue to work on today, or do you feel like it's relatively locked in for you at this point?
Oh, you're always changing your identity. Your identity is malleable. Your anything with your mind is all very malleable. And so it changes. I mean, early on in my life, the things that I found valuable then are different than they are now. Now, back then I was a law student. I was going to be a lawyer. Like, that was really important to me. And the feeling that I got from that, and the idea of, I want to make a lot of money, or, all these things were kind of top of my list. Now, like, I want to, back then I wanted to live in the city and all this stuff. Now I like, money is good, but it's a tool. Like, it's not the end all be all. and I
That's
don't
right.
define my success by the money that I make. My family is one of my top 3 priorities. And so that means I'm going to make sure that I'm there for them, that I'm doing the things that I need to do to be a great husband and a father. Um, I don't actually think of myself like lawyer is not actually one of my top priority, my top identities anymore. When I got
That's
law
awesome.
school, very first thing, what do you do? Oh, lawyer. I mean, that's kind of number one. Now, yeah, I'm a lawyer, but I don't necessarily think of myself as lawyer top of mind. Like that's down the list after a father, after Brad the guy, you know. And other things have changed too, like, you know, self growth, personal growth, spirituality. Those things have become more important. And I think those will become more and more important as time goes on. You know, as just kind of things change, the world changes around us, and we adapt as well.
So we have to, and I've loved all this, and honestly, I could probably talk with you about this for like a couple of hours. But you know, one of the reasons that we decided to sit down and record this is because of that quick exchange on LinkedIn, where I had recorded some of the coffee sodes about building an investment grade law firm. And one of the terms that I used repeatedly, especially with talking about operations and business units, was the idea of putting product on the shelves, as in establishing a business unit of, say, we'll make it easy and say like a lawyer and 2 paralegals supporting that lawyer, and having a repeating structure to put product on the shelves. I'm repeating it so that way people will hear kind of the level of repetition that I used in those episodes, and putting that product on the shelves so that way if you were to sell the firm, you have a repeatable business unit that the investor could put more product on the shelves. And you reacted on LinkedIn and said like, hey, bristle a little bit about that, but I don't want to put any extra words in your mouth. I'm curious, just like your thoughts on that when you first heard it. And I don't know if you listened to my follow-up episode that I did, the final episode about it, where I talked a little bit about it, but we can get into it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So I've not listened to that one yet. I did see that's out. I just haven't had a chance to hit that one yet. So, so from what I remember, the term that you used was the idea of product. Yes. And I said, I think you're going to get a lot of pushback from lawyers, and you're going to scare a lot of lawyers because you're essentially treating them as almost commodity type of a situation, a product, right? Because I think most lawyers don't think of themselves as a commodity, as a product off the shelf. We think of ourselves as unique snowflakes. Like no one else can do what I do the way I do it. People hire as the firm, hire as a lawyer for me because of what I do and how I interact. And so I think a lot of lawyers, you know, when you use that term, are going to be like, ooh, like that's going to turn them off, even though I think your underlying idea has a lot of value to it. But some of the terminology, I think, could scare some lawyers away that otherwise may say, oh, I really like that, but I don't like the way that you said it. Right. And so that's kind of what got that started.
Yeah. And I responded on LinkedIn that I think that's totally fair to observe that. And obviously, most of the people that I'm talking to are law firm owners. And it's been a framework that has been helpful at times to really understand the idea of establishing a process that can be repeated, rather than looking at it as like, okay, this lawyer, for example, when I hire them, I'm hiring them because they're really good at negotiating and they're going to need a legal assistant and a paralegal. But then this lawyer over here really only needs one legal assistant, right? It's an idea of how do you frame up the business so that way you can scale that practice without over accommodating just complete segments of individuals. So that term product, obviously part of it is intentional as well because of an idea of quality assurance. If I'm putting excellent product on the shelves, it should run through some quality assurance level, right? Like, it's funny, I was just reading an article last night about I love watches. I don't own a lot of watches. I just kind of like reading about watches. But I was reading about this watch. It's a field watch, so kind of a beater watch. It's under $200. The person was talking about, for under $200, right? It has this kind of like issue with the molding on it, and the titanium was clearly a little miscast and all that. It reminded me, with us having this episode coming up right after, this idea of the ability to put excellent product out there. Now, I'll say, yes, I can understand why someone would feel bad about that, would feel like, hey, don't, make me seem like I'm just one of the hand towels on the rack at Target. right? So I'm curious though, to sort of
Mhm.
flip it a little bit, that idea of product, because some of the language I heard you use was you have a strong understanding of the concept behind it. So how could that message be better delivered to, in particular, lawyers who are
Mhm.
part of that structure?
So I think we want to couch the conversation in terms of how this is benefiting our clients.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think a lot of what was discussed was kind of like how do we get a return for investments and things like that,
Yep.
and that's going to scare a lot of lawyers away who don't want to see that and are kind of anti against that.
Yeah.
So I think what we need to do is we need to say how is what we're going to do benefit our clients. Again, back to this idea of we want our practice to be client centric. So what
Yes.
can we do to better the experience that they're having working with us? So that's going to be things like bringing in technology. We want to make sure that for instance, every client gets a response to their inquiries, their questions, their calls, whatever it might be, in a timely manner. So how do we do that? Well, one way to do that is having some sort of technology so that maybe they can look up information themselves on some sort of a website or a portal for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or having dedicated staff members to answer those questions. Put in a process that, hey, once somebody calls in, you give them 3 hours and no more than that to get back to them. If you start couching it in terms of that, and also how this is going to make the lawyer's job easier and better, I think that's going to start appealing to lawyers who's like, oh, well, yeah, this is going to help my clients. I definitely want to do that, right? I want to give them better service. And if I could take some of this stuff off my plate, which I don't like, that's kind of that just takes up of my time, that's repetitious, boring, like that's great too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's really couching in terms of what's the benefit to the lawyer? Happy clients, happy lawyer, right?
Right. Right. So I'm curious if between the two of us, we could come up with a linguistic device that is better suited than something like product or product on the shelves that helps communicate on almost a heuristic level what the intention is. Which I'll speak real quick to my intention on it, which is that quality assurance, and it is that client centric. We want someone to know that when they work with a firm that is associated with maybe this investment group or this larger umbrella, et cetera, that they can expect a degree of service, a degree of quality that they wouldn't encounter elsewhere. And that it doesn't matter if they get assigned to attorney 1 or attorney 10, they know what the outcome will be and how they will be treated, right? And so that's why that's one of the reasons I used product, because it's one of the few ways that we can talk about repeating units. And when I talk about it in, say, the Genesis Mastermind group, the framework that I use is a business unit. Even that, of course, has some level of detachment from it. So are there any linguistic devices or any concepts that we could use to better describe this?
So I'm a big proponent, and this is something that you don't really see in law schools or in law firms yet, but I'm a really big proponent of having individuals do the task that they're best suited for. So if you are really good at research, then you should be spending the majority of your time doing research. You shouldn't also be trying to get new clients in the door for the firm. You shouldn't be trying to argue in court. You should be focusing your time on research. Conversely, if you really like arguing in court, if you're really, oral advocacy is like your jam, that's what you should be doing the most of your time doing, right? And so I think that as lawyers, lawyer is not a job title. Lawyer only says that, hey, that means you're licensed to do certain tasks, A, B, and C.
Interesting.
And those are very limited tasks that only lawyers can do. In most jurisdictions, it's give client advice, appear in front of a court or tribunal of some sort, sign off on final documents, final contracts, things like that.
Yeah.
That's about it. Everything else in a law firm could be done by someone else that doesn't have a law license. Initial drafts, research, all these, client development, business development, none of that needs to be done by lawyers. And so why don't we take the lawyers and figure out what they're best at and have them do that? And that way they don't have to do the stuff that they suck at and they don't like. Like any other business out there. You know, if you work in a corporation and you're in HR, all you do is HR. You don't also have to try to sell products for the company and deal with making sure that the light bulbs get changed when they go out. Like, you are focused on a specific task, HR related stuff. So why, as law firms, don't we model that same concept?
Okay, so that's interesting. So let me kind of play with that a little bit, because that's an important question that you just asked, of like, why don't more law firms model that? And I think perhaps we see some of that modeling in larger practices, say those that are 15, 20, 25 million plus, where they've moved lawyers into specific roles. Like, the easiest version of it would be the difference between a pre-litigation versus a litigation attorney within a personal injury practice, where, you know, one really focuses on trial, one focuses on pre-suit negotiation. We could do the very basic version of it. We could look at the estate planning world and say there are some attorneys who we would move them into the contract drafting, maybe some of the design role, but are not always the best people to sell, you know, to say what the price is. So they might take a client from post design, or maybe even design meeting, all the way through the signing meeting. But I think one of the issues is that smaller firms that have, say, 2, 3, 4 attorneys would have a harder time giving space to just put that attorney in a pure specialist role. And I'm just speaking from, you know, working with some of the law firm owners, where what they're looking for is not necessarily a full stack attorney, to use the developer terminology, but at least an attorney who can, after a client is signed up, could take that client all the way through the end of a case. So how can we reconcile some of those ideas?
Yeah, and I agree. I think it's a lot, the concept is a lot easier to envision for bigger firms, because you've got a staffing issue. I think for a small firm, it really comes down to going back down to the definition of practicing law. You only need a lawyer to, you know, final sign-offs. You only need a lawyer to advise a client, to give legal advice. You only need a lawyer to advocate in court. Everything else can be done by someone else. So you can hire a paralegal who will charge less, who you have to pay less than a lawyer. You can hire a staff member who just does marketing for you, who brings in clients. You can pay them less than a lawyer. And I think part of it is getting lawyers to accept that they don't need to have their hand in everything. And so that's ego driven. And that's mindset, identity stuff that needs to be dealt with. But if we can get lawyers to say, hey, I don't need to have my hand in every single thing that goes on, it's okay that I turn over the marketing to somebody else. It's okay that I turn over the initial drafting of the documents to somebody else. I'm the one who's there, though, to answer the client's questions when they have them, to go over the final version of it and say, hey, do you understand this? Does this say what it is that you intend? You know, and be able to kind of hold their hand through that process. If you can get them to realize that, and that they can save money by not worrying about other lawyers, they don't need to have 7 other lawyers do these things. You can hire lower level clerks for that matter, for a lot of it. I mean, that I think might be a way to get some of the smaller firms in there who are always looking at the bottom line, you know, because they're always trying to, you know, make sure they get things paid. And you can still grow. You can scale the business that way, the firm that way, because you don't have to have a lawyer for every time you want to grow. You can bring in somebody else that's not a lawyer to fill in some of those gaps, and allow the lawyer then to spend more time doing what it is that only they can do in the firm.
Yeah, and I think this is a really strong point of agreement here, which is the wise use of great support team in a law firm is often underutilized. But great support teams make for exceptional law firms. Look, obviously there are some firm types, I think very quickly, of criminal defense or even family law, where there's a preponderance of hearings that you have to go to and you need a lawyer to show up there. But that still goes to the point that you were making, Brad, that, if you need the lawyer for the lawyer part, you just have to observe that as the reality and hire accordingly. I suppose I hope that in the building investment grade law firms idea, that it could now here's the tough part, is any type of consolidation has obvious pluses and minuses. And I think as, small business owners, there's always a little bit of friction, to bring back that word, with the idea of consolidation. But perhaps one of the pluses of investors coming in and consolidating some firms and changing some business structures, it could make more space for, say, lawyers who really want to focus on the research component, really want to focus on legal writing, or really want to focus on, as you said, oral advocacy. And it could give room for those roles to shine in more law firms. But that doesn't mean, I'll be open about it, doesn't mean it doesn't make me a little bit nervous, but it seems like it's coming no matter what. Kind of as a final question before transitioning to the true final question, as you're looking ahead on some of those ideas that I talked about in those coffee sods about investment grade firms, about the entrance of private equity, what do you see as, what concerns do you have, and what about it excites you?
So I used to be 100% against allowing non-ownership of law firms, non-lawyer ownership, because I saw it as what's going to happen is now we're going to have these big corporations coming in, and the small firms particularly are going to get bumped out. They're going to get taken over by by these big corporate behemoths. I've seen this in the veterinary world. My wife's in the veterinary medicine world, and that's happening there, where all the small little practices are getting eaten up by the big corporate conglomerates who are buying up practice after practice. And there's definitely decided noticeably decrease in care and level of care that goes on in there. Because now it's now corporate run. It's very ABCD out the door. How do we maximize profits? And I think that idea of maximizing profits over the best interests of the lawyer, or the client, I should say, that is what scares lawyers the most. Especially in this whole small firm world, is we're going to have our healthcare system in the legal world where, you're treated like crap and you get paid a lot, charge a lot of money. And nobody ends up, happy at the end, except for those who are investors with money in their pockets. However, I have since changed my perspective, and I'm now in favor of actually non-lawyer ownership of law firms, because I see it as beneficial for lawyers and small firms. There needs to be boundaries and there needs to be safeguards in place to protect the interests of the client. But if you can bring in maybe a professional CEO and offer them equity, that's an incentive for someone to bring somebody else on, that this is what they do. They are great at running a business. That now takes that off of your plate as a lawyer, so you can focus on the lawyering and not on running a business, which is what most lawyers want. They want to be a lawyer, not a business owner, right? It allows you to give equity to staff members for their loyalty. You've got paralegals, you have assistants who have been with the firm for 20, 30 years. You can say, hey, I want to give you some ownership interest in this business because you have been very loyal and you've done a great job. And without you, I don't know what I do. So here is, a 2% stake in the business. So now you're going to get profits. So not only are you incentivized because of your loyalty, but now you're incentivized to grow the business and help it bring on general revenues. So I think there are some benefits to doing that. You can start getting in some investments to allow things like technology. You can bring in things that a law firm otherwise wouldn't have the capital to do. Now you can bring in a technology platform, maybe that you need the cash to handle, or to be able to expand into a new practice area that you just don't have cash to be able to do. So I think there are a lot of good things that you could get out of it. And looking at other countries that have opened up ownership, they've not experienced the doom and gloom that, a lot of lawyers are fearing. But I know there are a lot more venture capital situations in the US than there are other countries. So that situation is going to look different if it would open up here. And again, you really have to have those safeguards in place to make sure that we don't start looking at profits over the best interests of our clients, that we always think what's in the best interest of the clients first, and then everything else follows from that.
I love it. I appreciate that sort of last word from you on that situation. And before I ask you the final question in all this, if people are interested in getting to know more about you, more about Miller Law, New Modern Lawyer, what's the best place to send them to?
I mean, the place I'm most active, that I'm usually there all the time, is LinkedIn. So if you wanna get into a conversation like this, or I mean, there's links to other sites on that as well, and that's probably the best kind of place to kind of go to see the world of Brad when it comes to the law and everything.
The guy Brad, as you were saying.
I am just a guy. That's right.
All right, Brad, last little 3-part question. What are you reading, watching, and listening to these days?
Most of the reading that I do is stuff that I see on LinkedIn. I do read some other books. Right now, I'm just starting to get into Alex H.M. Smith, who's talking about strategy, and really the importance of differentiating yourself as part of your strategy for success. As a not necessarily a law firm, like he's talking just in general, but I think law firms is definitely ripe for that. And so that's the kind of stuff I'm reading right now. A lot of stuff I'm listening to are actually kind of spiritual related, different kind of podcasts and things like that relating to kind of spirituality, intuition, things like that. That's kind of a growing part of what's important to me going on right now.
That's awesome.
I don't really watch much anymore. Like, we don't really watch television outside of some sports.
Do you have a favorite team?
It depends the sport. It depends the sport.
What's the favorite sport?
Favorite sport's probably football.
College or NFL?
College. I prefer college. My wife would disagree, but I prefer college.
I'll admit I'm with your wife on this one. I love the NFL, but at least in college, what's your favorite college team?
Well, it's going to be my alma mater, Ohio State.
Oh no, I'm a Wolverines fan. Come on. We were so close to ending this on a positive note, Brad, and here we are.
You brought the NFL stuff in, so it just started to head down there. And then you could have just left. Oh, great! I'm glad you're Ohio State. You just left it at that, but you had to go the next. So it's your own fault.
That's okay. Look, I'm married to someone who's an OSU fan, so I can't let my blood boil every time that I hear it, or it would be a really bad marriage.
You would be in tough. Yeah, it would be not good for your health. Let's just say that.
That's right. Well, Brad, I really appreciate you coming on here, having this conversation. It has been an absolute delight talking with you on something that ended up being even more wide-ranging than I expected, and yet addressing some both very intimate and exciting topics in life and law firm.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
Good. And we will see you all in the next episode of They Don't Teach This in Law School.